I never thought I'd be that woman. After 15 years of handling divorce cases, I'd seen every variation of infidelity imaginable. I'd represented countless women who discovered their husbands were having affairs with younger women, and men who threw away decades of marriage for a fleeting passion. I thought I understood it all, the psychology, the justifications, the inevitable fallout. But standing in my kitchen that crisp September morning, watching James Crawford make coffee with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged there, I realized how little I truly understood about the complexities of forbidden desire. "Mom, isn't he amazing?" Emma's voice pulled me from my thoughts. My daughter was perched on one of the kitchen island stools, gazing adoringly at her fiancé. "He even remembers exactly how everyone likes their coffee." James turned, flashing that disarming smile that made his green eyes crinkle at the corners. "Black with 1 sugar for you, Victoria?" he asked, sliding a mug across the granite countertop. "You remembered," I said, accepting the coffee and trying to ignore the slight tremor in my hands when our fingers brushed. "I pay attention to details," he replied, holding my gaze a moment longer than necessary. That was 3 months ago, when Emma first brought James home to announce their engagement. My initial reaction had been concern about their age difference. Emma at 25 seemed too young to marry, especially to someone 3 years her senior. But watching them together that first weekend, I had to admit they seemed well matched. James was intelligent, successful, and treated my daughter with genuine affection. What I hadn't expected was the immediate, electric awareness I felt in his presence. At 42, I thought I was past such schoolgirl reactions. I'd been divorced for 5 years, had dated casually, and was comfortable with my life as it was. My law practice was thriving. I had a beautiful home on Mercer Island, and my relationship with Emma had never been better. But something about James awakened feelings I thought long dormant. Perhaps it was the way he engaged me in conversations about law and politics, displaying a depth of knowledge that surprised me. Or how he'd catch my eye across the room when Emma said something particularly naive, sharing a moment of unspoken understanding. The weekend of their engagement announcement passed without incident, and I thought that would be the end of it. Just a mild attraction to an inappropriate man, easily dismissed and forgotten. Then Emma asked me to help plan the wedding. "You're so good at organizing things, Mom," she pleaded over lunch at our favorite cafe in downtown Seattle. "And James said you'd be perfect to help us navigate all the contracts and vendors." "James said that, did he?" I tried to keep my voice neutral. "He really admires you, you know," Emma continued, stirring her latte. "He says you're one of the smartest women he's ever met. Please say you'll help?" How could I refuse? So began 3 months of regular meetings, tastings, and venue visits. Sometimes Emma would be caught up at her gallery. She was an assistant curator at the Seattle Art Museum, leaving James and me to handle the details. Alone. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment everything changed. We were visiting a potential wedding venue, an elegant restored mansion in the Queen Anne district. Emma had called at the last minute, stuck at work with a difficult client. "Go without me," she insisted. "I trust your judgment, and James has great taste." The venue coordinator led us through the grand rooms, discussing capacity and logistics. James walked beside me, occasionally leaning close to comment on various features. Each time he did, I caught the scent of his cologne, something woodsy and expensive, and felt that now familiar flutter in my stomach. After the tour, we found ourselves alone in the mansion's library, waiting for the coordinator to return with some paperwork. "What do you think?" James asked, running his hand along a mahogany bookshelf. "It's beautiful," I replied, trying to focus on the professional task at hand. "The space would work well for the number of guests you're planning." He turned to face me, and I realized we were standing closer than necessary in the intimate room. "I wasn't asking about the venue, Victoria." The way he said my name, soft, almost caressing, made my breath catch. "James." "I see how you look at me sometimes," he continued, taking a step closer. "When you think no one's watching. I don't know what you're talking about." But I did. Of course I did. "I think you do." Another step. "I think about you too. More than I should. You're engaged to my daughter." The words came out barely above a whisper. "I know." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers lingered on my cheek. "Tell me to stop." I should have. Everything I knew about right and wrong, every case I'd handled where families were destroyed by infidelity, every motherly instinct I possessed, all of it demanded that I step back, shut this down before it began. Instead, I leaned into his touch. The kiss, when it came, was nothing like I'd imagined in my guilty fantasies. It was better. His lips were soft but insistent, his hand cupping my face with a gentleness that made my heart ache. I kissed him back with a hunger that shocked me, my fingers gripping his expensive silk shirt. The sound of heels clicking on hardwood floors broke us apart. The venue coordinator returned, oblivious to what had just transpired. We signed the papers, made polite conversation, and left the mansion separately. That night, I lay awake in my bed, touching my lips where I could still feel his kiss. My phone buzzed with a text message. James, I can't stop thinking about what happened. I stared at the screen for a long moment before responding. We can't do this. James, meet me tomorrow. We need to talk. I knew I should refuse. Instead, I found myself typing, where? He suggested a small hotel bar in Belltown, far from anyone who might know us. I told myself I was going just to end things properly, to establish clear boundaries. I lied. The Four Seasons bar was dimly lit and discreet, tucked away from the main lobby. I arrived early, ordering a gin martini to steady my nerves. The bartender had just set it down when I felt James's presence behind me. That's your drink of choice? He asked, sliding onto the adjacent stool. I would have guessed whiskey. I took a careful sip. You don't know everything about me. No, he agreed, ordering a scotch. But I'd like to. He looked devastating in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. His role as VP of Product Development at a prominent tech startup clearly paid well. This was a mistake, I said, but made no move to leave. Probably. His knee brushed against mine under the bar. But we're both here anyway. James, you're marrying my daughter in 4 months. I know. He turned to face me fully. I care about Emma. She's sweet and kind and you're having drinks with her mother in a hotel bar. He was quiet for a moment, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Have you ever felt something so powerful it terrifies you? Something that goes against everything you think you should want? Stop. But my voice lacked conviction. The first time I saw you, he continued, standing in your kitchen that morning, I couldn't take my eyes off you. The way you moved. So confident and graceful. The intelligence in your eyes when you talked about your cases. Your laugh. He took a drink. I tried to fight it. God knows I tried. We both need to keep trying, I whispered, even as I leaned slightly closer. Do we? His hand found mine under the bar, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. Tell me you don't feel this too. The touch sent shivers up my arm. What I feel doesn't matter. It matters to me. I pulled my hand away and stood abruptly. I need some air. Without waiting for his response, I headed for the hotel's rooftop garden. The September evening was unusually warm, the Seattle skyline glittering against the darkening sky. I heard his footsteps behind me, but didn't turn around. Victoria. His voice was soft, pleading. This isn't just about us, I said, still facing the city lights. There are other people involved. Emma would be devastated. I know. He moved closer, close enough that I could feel his body heat. But right now, all I can think about is you. I turned to face him, intending to be rational, to end this madness. But the look in his eyes undid me. Before I could stop myself, I was reaching for him, pulling his mouth down to mine. This kiss was different from the one in the mansion. Deeper, more desperate. His hands tangled in my hair as he backed me against the garden wall, hidden from view by strategically placed shrubbery. I knew we should stop, but when his lips traced down my neck, rational thought became impossible. We can't do this here, I gasped, as his hand slid under my silk blouse. He pulled back slightly, his breathing ragged. Come upstairs with me. It was a turning point, a clear line between fantasy and reality. Going to his room would make this real, irreversible. I have a room, he said softly. Room 1542. If you want this as much as I do, meet me there in 10 minutes. If not, he pressed a gentle kiss to my temple. We'll never speak of this again. He walked away, leaving me alone with my warring emotions. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, my body humming with desire, my mind screaming warnings. The elevator ride to the 15th floor was a blur. I kept expecting to come to my senses, to turn around and leave. Instead, I found myself standing in front of room 1542, my hand raised to knock. The door opened immediately, as if he'd been waiting. Without a word, he pulled me inside and into his arms. This time, there was no hesitation, no pretense of restraint. Clothes fell away as we stumbled toward the bed, hands and mouths exploring newly exposed skin. "You're incredible," he breathed, trailing kisses down my stomach. "So beautiful." When he finally entered me, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to my eyes. We moved together as if we'd been lovers for years, finding a rhythm that built slowly, inexorably, until we both shattered. Afterward, lying in his arms, reality began to seep back in. "Oh God," I whispered, "what have we done?" He tightened his hold on me. "Don't regret this. Please." "How can I not? I just slept with my daughter's fiancé." "Look at me." He tilted my chin up. "What happened between us? It's more than just sex. You know that." I did know. That was what made it so dangerous. My phone buzzed from somewhere on the floor. Emma's name flashed on the screen. "Hi, sweetie," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady as James traced patterns on my bare back. "Mom, I just saw the most perfect wedding dress. Can you come look at it with me tomorrow?" The guilt hit me like a physical blow. "Of course." "Great, I'll pick you up at 10. Love you." "Love you too," I managed before hanging up. James pulled me back against his chest. "We need to figure this out." "Figure what out? There's nothing to figure out. This can't happen again." He was quiet for a long moment. "What if I called off the wedding?" I sat up, staring at him in shock. "Are you insane?" "Maybe, but I can't marry Emma knowing I'm in love with her mother." "Love?" I laughed bitterly. "We barely know each other." "I know enough." He sat up too, taking my face in his hands. "I know you're brilliant and passionate. I know you pretend to be tougher than you are. I know you're afraid of thunder but won't admit it. I know you're the most fascinating woman I've ever met." "Stop it." I pulled away, gathering my clothes. This was a mistake. A moment of weakness, that's all. But as I dressed hastily, we both knew it wasn't true. Something had started here that couldn't be easily stopped. The next few weeks were torture. Wedding preparations continued, with Emma growing more excited by the day. James and I maintained a careful distance in public, but the tension between us was palpable. Then came the night of Emma's gallery opening. The Seattle Art Museum's contemporary wing was packed for Emma's first major exhibition opening. As assistant curator, she'd spent months organizing modern love, digital age relationships in art, and her excitement was contagious. I watched her flit from group to group, explaining the pieces with infectious enthusiasm. "She's really in her element," James said, appearing beside me with 2 glasses of champagne. He handed me one, careful not to let our fingers touch. "She is," I agreed, taking a sip to hide my reaction to his proximity. "You should be with her, not standing here with me. She's busy networking. Besides," he lowered his voice, "I haven't been able to stop thinking about last week." Last week, when we'd met at his condo under the pretense of reviewing wedding vendors. We'd barely made it through the door before clothes started coming off. It had been wild, desperate, both of us knowing we shouldn't but unable to stop. "We can't talk about this here," I hissed, noting several of Emma's colleagues nearby. "Meet me in the medieval section, 10 minutes. Before I could protest, he was gone, smoothly intercepting Emma and drawing her into conversation with some tech industry donors. I waited what felt like an appropriate amount of time before slipping away from the main gallery. The medieval section was closed for renovation, dim and deserted. James was waiting in a shadowy alcove beside a suit of armor. "This is ridiculous," I said, even as I moved into his arms. "Someone could come in." "I don't care." His mouth found mine, hot and demanding. "God, I've wanted to do this all night. You look incredible in that dress." The black cocktail dress had been a splurge, form-fitting but elegant. The way James looked at me when I'd arrived made it worth every penny. His hand slid down my sides, bunching the silk fabric. "Let me take you home tonight." "You know I can't. You're staying at Emma's." "I'll make an excuse, say I have an early meeting." "James," I pulled back slightly, "we need to stop this. Do you want to stop?" "What I want doesn't matter. It matters to me." He pressed me against the wall, his body hot and hard against mine. "Tell me you want to stop, and I will. Tell me you don't think about me constantly. Tell me you don't wake up wanting me." I closed my eyes, fighting for control. "Of course I think about you. But..." "No buts." His hand slid under my dress, making me gasp. "Just this. Just us." The sound of voices in the hallway broke us apart. We straightened our clothes hastily, trying to look casual as a security guard passed by with his flashlight. "Medieval art, huh?" the guard said cheerfully. "Don't see many folks interested in this stuff during events. Just getting some air," James replied smoothly. "Shall we head back to the party, Victoria?" The rest of the evening was torture. I watched James play the devoted fiancé, his arm around Emma's waist, smiling and charming everyone. Only I knew that every time our eyes met across the room, he was remembering how I felt beneath him, around him. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a text. "James, she's asleep. I told her I have an early conference call. Can I come over?" I stared at the message for a long time. This was different from our hurried encounters in hotel rooms or his condo. This was inviting him into my home, my bed. Me, this is wrong. James, everything about this is wrong. But it doesn't make it less real. Me, what's your real meeting tomorrow? James, board presentation at 9? I can be at your place in 20 minutes. I should have said no. Instead, I sent him my gate code. He arrived exactly 20 minutes later, still in his suit from the gallery. As soon as I opened the door, he pulled me into a kiss that left me breathless. "I've been wanting to do that all night," he murmured against my lips. We barely made it upstairs to my bedroom. This time was slower, more deliberate. He took his time exploring every inch of me, drawing out my pleasure until I was practically begging. Afterward, lying in the tangled sheets, reality began to creep back in. "What are we doing?" I whispered into the darkness. He propped himself up on an elbow, looking down at me. "Falling in love, I think." "Don't say that." "Why not? It's true." His fingers traced patterns on my bare shoulder. "I've never felt this way about anyone, including Emma." "You can't compare us. She's young, innocent, and you're experienced, complicated, fascinating." He kissed me softly. "I love how your mind works, how you challenge me, how you see through all my bullshit." "James, I know what you're going to say, that we need to end this, that it's wrong, that we're hurting Emma." He sighed. "But what if staying with her would hurt her more in the long run?" I sat up, pulling the sheet around me. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe I should call off the wedding." "You can't." "Why not?" He sat up too, frustration evident in his voice. "Because it would be embarrassing? Because people would talk? I don't care about any of that. Because it would break her heart. And what about our hearts?" He caught my face in his hands. "Look me in the eye and tell me you don't love me." I couldn't. The truth was, somewhere between stolen kisses and late-night conversations, between passion and understanding, I'd fallen desperately in love with him. "It doesn't matter," I said finally. "Love isn't always enough." "It could be." He kissed me again, deeply, desperately. "Run away with me." I laughed, but it came out more like a sob. "Now you're really being ridiculous." "Am I? We could go anywhere. Start fresh where no one knows us. And leave Emma to pick up the pieces? Leave my practice, my life? For love? Yes." The scary part was, for a moment, I considered it. The thought of waking up to him every morning, of building a life together, was intoxicating. But then I thought of Emma's face when she'd shown me her wedding dress, of her excitement planning their future together, of the trust in her eyes when she looked at both of us. "You need to go," I said, pulling away. "This has to stop." He was quiet for a long moment. "What if I can't let you go?" "You have to." I got up, wrapping myself in my robe. "We both have to." But as I watched him dress and leave, I wondered if either of us was strong enough to end this before it destroyed everything we loved. The following weeks were a blur of stolen moments and mounting guilt. Every wedding preparation became an exquisite form of torture, watching Emma try on wedding dresses while James texted me underneath the table, discussing flower arrangements while remembering how his lips felt on my skin, reviewing venue details while fighting the urge to run away with him. The breaking point came during the engagement party at my house. I'd spent days preparing, determined to be the perfect mother of the bride despite my inner turmoil. The weather cooperated, allowing us to set up tables in the garden overlooking Lake Washington. "Everything looks amazing," Emma gushed, hugging me tight. "You're the best mom ever." Each word was like a knife to my heart. James caught my eye across the garden, his expression unreadable. He was standing with his parents, playing his role perfectly, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. The party was in full swing when my ex-husband Michael pulled me aside. "We need to talk," he said, steering me toward my home office. "Something's going on with you." "I don't know what you mean," but my heart was racing. Michael closed the office door. After 15 years of marriage, he could still read me better than anyone. "You've lost weight, you're distracted, and the way you look at James, don't." "Victoria." His voice was gentle. "Please tell me you're not doing what I think you're doing." Before I could respond, the office door opened. James stood there, his face flushed from champagne or emotion. Everything okay in here? He asked, his eyes moving between Michael and me. Michael's expression hardened. No, everything is not okay. We're discussing how you're sleeping with my ex-wife while engaged to my daughter. The silence that followed was deafening. James stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. How long have you known? I whispered. I suspected for weeks. The way you two look at each other isn't exactly subtle. Michael ran a hand through his graying hair. God, Victoria, what were you thinking? It's not her fault, James said, moving to stand beside me. I pursued her. You're both responsible, Michael snapped. Do you have any idea what this will do to Emma? We never meant for this to happen, I said, tears threatening. But it did happen, and now you need to end it or I'll tell Emma myself. You can't, James protested. It would destroy her. And continuing this affair won't? Michael laughed bitterly. You have until tomorrow to tell her or I will. He left us alone in the office, the sounds of the party filtering through the closed door. James immediately pulled me into his arms. We'll figure this out, he murmured into my hair. How? I pulled back to look at him. Michael's right. We have to end this. Or we could tell her the truth, together. The truth? I laughed hysterically. That her mother and fiancé have been having an affair? That we've been lying to her for months? That we fell in love. That we tried to fight it but couldn't. Love doesn't excuse betrayal. A knock at the door made us spring apart. Emma poked her head in. There you are. The photographer wants some family photos. She looked between us curiously. Everything okay? Fine, sweetie, I managed. Just discussing some legal details for the prenup. She accepted the lie easily, trust shining in her eyes. Well, come on, everyone's waiting. The rest of the party passed in a blur. I went through the motions, smiling for photos, making toasts, playing the proud mother. But inside, I was falling apart. Later that night, after everyone had left, I sat alone in my garden with a bottle of wine. My phone buzzed with a text from James. James, I can't sleep. Can I come over? Me, we can't. Not anymore. James, I love you. We'll find a way. Me, love isn't enough. Not this time. I turned off my phone and finished the wine, watching the moonlight dance on the lake. Everything I'd built, my relationship with Emma, my reputation, my self-respect, was balanced on a knife's edge. The next morning, I woke to several missed calls from James and one text, James, I'm telling Emma today. I can't marry her knowing I love you. Panic seized me. I called him immediately. Don't do this, I pleaded when he answered. I have to. Michael's right. She deserves the truth. The truth will destroy her. And living a lie won't? He sighed heavily. I'm meeting her for lunch. Come with me. We'll tell her together. I can't. Then I'll do it alone. He hung up before I could protest further. I spent the next hour pacing my house, jumping every time my phone buzzed. Finally, around 2 o'clock, Emma called. Her voice was strange, distant. Mom, can you come over, now? My heart stopped. Emma. Just come, please. I drove to her apartment in a daze, knowing everything was about to change. When she opened the door, her eyes were red from crying. Is it true? She asked before I could speak. Are you sleeping with James? Standing in Emma's apartment doorway, facing my daughter's tear-stained face, I felt my carefully constructed world crumbling. Come inside, she said quietly. James told me everything. Her living room was a mess of tissues and what looked like broken glass, probably the vase I'd given her last Christmas. James sat on the couch, his head in his hands. How long? Emma's voice was eerily calm. How long have you been sleeping with my fiancé? Emma, words failed me. 3 months, James answered for me. Since the mansion viewing. 3 months? She laughed, a hollow sound. 3 months of planning my wedding while sleeping with my mother. Did you laugh about it behind my back? Did you enjoy making a fool of me? No. I moved toward her, but she stepped back. It wasn't like that. Then, what was it like, Mom? Explain it to me. Explain how my mother, who taught me about self-respect and dignity, could do this to me. We didn't plan this, James said, standing. It just happened. Things don't just happen, Emma screamed, throwing a wedding magazine at him. You make choices. You both made choices. Every single time you lied to me. Every time you went behind my back. You're right, I whispered. We made terrible choices. He says he loves you. Emma's voice broke. My fiancé is in love with my mother. Do you love him too? The truth stuck in my throat. How could I admit to my daughter that I'd fallen in love with her fiancé? That despite the guilt and shame, part of me still wanted him. My silence was answer enough. Get out, she said quietly. Both of you. Get out of my house and my life. Emma, please, James started. Get out. We left separately, the sound of Emma's sobs following us down the hallway. In the parking lot, James tried to stop me. Victoria, wait. We need to talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. I fumbled for my car keys, my hands shaking. We've destroyed everything. Then let's make it mean something. Be with me, openly. I stared at him in disbelief. Are you insane? We just broke my daughter's heart and you're talking about being together? I love you, he said desperately. Doesn't that count for anything? Love? I laughed bitterly. Love wouldn't have let this happen. Love would have stopped before it started. This wasn't love, James. This was selfishness and lust and midlife crisis wrapped in a pretty package. You don't mean that. I do. I got into my car. Goodbye, James. The next few weeks were a blur of consequences. Emma moved in with her father, refusing to speak to me. My phone filled with angry messages from family and friends as the story spread. Several clients quietly transferred their cases to other attorneys, not wanting to work with someone involved in such a scandal. James left Seattle, taking a job in San Francisco. He sent me one last email. I know you think what we had wasn't real, but you're wrong. I'll always love you, Victoria. Maybe someday you'll forgive yourself enough to admit you loved me too. I threw myself into work, took on pro bono cases, anything to keep busy. Michael kept me updated on Emma. She'd quit her job at the museum, was thinking about moving to New York. 6 months after everything fell apart, she finally agreed to meet me for coffee. The cafe was neutral territory, somewhere we'd never been before. She looked thinner, older somehow. I'm not ready to forgive you, she said immediately. I don't know if I'll ever be ready. I understand. But, she hesitated, you're still my mom, and I miss you. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I'm seeing a therapist, she continued. She says I need to understand why this happened to move past it. So tell me, why him? Why did it have to be him? I considered my answer carefully. Sometimes we make choices that seem impossible to explain. I could tell you about feeling seen, about connection and understanding, but none of that excuses what I did to you. No, it doesn't. She stirred her untouched coffee. James called last week. He's engaged again. Some tech startup founder in Silicon Valley. The news shouldn't have hurt, but it did. Are you okay? Actually, yes, she smiled slightly. It made me realize something. He wasn't who I thought he was. Neither were you. And maybe that's the hardest part of all this. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything between us heavy in the air. I'm moving to New York, she finally said. The Metropolitan Museum offered me a position. When do you leave? Next month. She met my eyes. I'd like to have dinner before I go. With you and Dad, if that's okay. Tears welled in my eyes. I'd like that very much. As I watched her walk away, I thought about choices and consequences, about love and betrayal. James had been right about one thing. I did love him, in my own way. But love isn't always enough. Sometimes the price of desire is too high. I still dream about him sometimes. His smile, his touch, the way he made me feel alive again. But then I think of Emma's face that day in her apartment, and I wake up knowing I made the right choice in letting him go. Life goes on. Emma sends me occasional texts from New York. My practice is slowly recovering. I've even started dating again, carefully, cautiously. But I'll never forget the lesson I learned that autumn, that the heart's desires, left unchecked, can destroy everything we hold dear. Sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away. The Seattle rain drummed steadily against my office windows as I reviewed case files. My practice had finally recovered from the scandal, thanks partly to a high-profile win in a corporate law case that reminded people why I was one of the city's top attorneys. A knock on my door interrupted my concentration. My assistant Sarah poked her head in. Your daughter's on line 1. My heart still skipped whenever Emma called. Our relationship had slowly mended over the past 2 years, though there remained delicate subjects we carefully avoided. Hi, sweetie, I answered, trying to sound casual. Mom, her voice was excited. Guess what? I got the promotion. I'm now the youngest senior curator in the Met's modern art department. That's wonderful. Pride swelled in my chest. I knew you could do it. There's more, she paused. I'm seeing someone. It's serious. Oh? I kept my voice neutral, though my stomach tightened. His name is Daniel. He's a professor at Columbia. And I'd like you to meet him. I'm coming home for Christmas and he's coming with me. The significance of this wasn't lost on me. Emma hadn't brought anyone home since James. "I'd love to meet him," I said carefully. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" "I am." Her voice softened. "I've done a lot of healing, Mom. We both have." After we hung up, I sat looking out at the rain-soaked city. So much had changed in 2 years. Michael had remarried to a lovely kindergarten teacher who made him happier than I ever had. Emma had built a successful life in New York. And I. My phone buzzed with a text. "David, still on for dinner tonight?" I smiled as I typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." David was a widowed judge I'd been seeing for 6 months. Our relationship was comfortable, honest, uncomplicated. He knew about my past and didn't judge me for it. We were taking things slowly, both of us carrying our own scars. As I gathered my things to leave the office, an email notification popped up on my computer. The sender's name made my breath catch, James Crawford. For a moment, my finger hovered over the delete button. But curiosity won out. "Dear Victoria, I hope this email finds you well. I heard through mutual acquaintances that your practice is thriving again. I'm glad. I'm writing because I'm getting divorced. That engagement I rushed into after leaving Seattle? It was a mistake. An attempt to prove I could move on. It lasted 8 months. The truth is, I've never stopped thinking about you, about us. I know I have no right to tell you this, but every relationship since you has felt hollow. No one understands me the way you did. I'm moving back to Seattle next month. New job, fresh start. I don't expect anything from you. I just thought you should know. Take care, James." I read the email twice, feeling the old pull, the whisper of what-ifs. Then I deliberately clicked delete. Opening my phone, I texted David, "Can't wait for dinner." Had a breakthrough on the Morrison case. His response came quickly. "Tell me all about it over wine. Proud of you." I smiled, gathering my coat. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Sometimes life gives us second chances, not with the people who broke us, but with those who help us rebuild. The trick is recognizing the difference. As I drove to meet David, I thought about Emma and her new boyfriend, about fresh starts and earned trust. The past would always be there. The choices we made, the people we hurt, the lessons we learned. But the future? That was still unwritten. And this time, I intended to write it better.